All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring how Benito Mussolini essentially hijacked Italian football in the 1930s, taking it from a simple, beloved pastime and turning it into this meticulously engineered engine of fascist propaganda. We're looking at a time where the lines between a football pitch and a political battlefield didn't just blur, they completely vanished.
So, to really grasp this transformation, we have to start by asking, how on earth did a simple game of football become a mirror for fascist ideology? Well, the regime figured out pretty quickly that mass culture could be molded to manufacture mass consent. For them, football wasn't just a game anymore. It was this perfect, ready-made stage to showcase physical strength, collective obedience, and the absolute glory of the state over the individual. Here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to break this down into 5 parts, starting with the political pitch, then how they rebranded the sport, putting soldiers on the pitch, weaponizing the 1934 World Cup, and finally, using football as foreign policy.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the political pitch.
This brilliantly highlights the massive ideological divide of the era. See, the British, they viewed international sport as this vehicle for goodwill, keeping government far, far away from the pitch. But the Italian fascist state took the exact opposite approach. They viewed players as literally mobilized soldiers fighting for national prestige. And honestly, the British were shockingly slow to realize that their traditional game had been completely weaponized right under their noses. Moving right along to Section 2, rebranding the beautiful game. To make the sport a true reflection of the state, Mussolini first had to erase its British roots. They did this by popularizing the term calcio. Now, calcio literally means to kick, and reviving this word from a centuries-old Florentine game engineered this massive cultural shift. Just like that, it was no longer a British export, it was branded as an Italian birthright. And they didn't just stop at the name of the sport itself. Oh no, they forced historically successful clubs to completely drop their English names in favor of localized Italian titles. So Genoa 93 became Genova 93. AC Milan was stripped down to just Milano. And Internazionale Milan, that became Ambrosiano. I mean, imagine your favorite local team suddenly being forced by the government to change its historic name just to wipe out any trace of foreign influence. It's wild. And to physically mold the nation, the government launched the largest stadia building initiative in Italian history. They operated under the banner that, quote, every community must have a sports field. They built these imposing, clean-lined fascist structures meant to intimidate and inspire. Massive venues like the Stadio Benito Mussolini and the Foro Mussolini went up. And these weren't just functional spaces, you guys. They were essentially concrete cathedrals tying the modern regime directly to the ancient glory of the Roman Empire, totally designed to make the individual feel small and the state feel omnipotent. Which brings us to Section 3, soldiers on the pitch. With the stages built, the regime needed elite talent and fast, especially since Italy hadn't even played in a World Cup before the 1930s. So, national team coach Vittorio Pozzo took advantage of some clever citizenship loopholes to recruit what were known as oriundi. These were incredibly talented South American players of Italian descent. By claiming these foreign-born players were just, returning home to their ancestral roots, they could bolster the squad without outwardly betraying their super intense nationalist ideology. And to justify using foreign-born players without looking like total hypocrites, Pozzo framed their service strictly in militaristic terms. His famous line was, if they can die for Italy, they can play for Italy. By equating a spot on the roster with a literal military draft, Pozzo basically conscripted these athletes into the armed forces. Players like Luis Monti, Raimundo Orsi, and Enrique Guaita were essentially drafted into a political machine. And this reality became terrifyingly clear when Guaita abruptly fled the country in 1935 out of sheer terror of being sent to an actual war zone. Fun fact here, Luis Monti is actually the only player in history to represent 2 different nations in successive World Cup finals. But look, while they were celebrated on the pitch, their status was always incredibly precarious, tied entirely to their utility to the state. Let's move into Section 4, weaponizing the 1934 World Cup. When 1934 rolled around, Mussolini personally took the reins. These matches were completely stripped of simple sporting joy and transformed into highly orchestrated political rallies. Picture this, stadiums absolutely packed to the brim with black shirts, players giving synchronized fascist salutes, and giant posters of Il Duce looming right over the pitch.
Mussolini even commissioned a second, massive trophy called the Coppa del Duce, just to ensure his personal brand was the one associated with the ultimate victory.
And the desperation for victory, it went all the way to the referee's whistle. There were widespread allegations that the Swedish referee, Ivan Eklund, actually had a private audience with Il Duce right before the semifinal against Austria. In matches characterized by incredibly aggressive Italian tactics, including a quarterfinal that literally left 3 Spanish players injured, the officiating miraculously seemed to favor the host nation. When Italy ultimately prevailed in extra time amidst heavily criticized calls, it left historians asking, was this a neutral referee or a coerced official? While hard, undeniable documentary evidence of direct coercion doesn't exist, the circumstantial evidence and the intense political pressure cooker of that 1934 World Cup make it a huge lingering question. The regime simply, absolutely could not afford to lose on home soil.
And here's a detail that really tells you everything you need to know. Despite their massive contribution to winning the whole tournament, those Oriundi players were controversially denied the special commemorative medal awarded to the rest of the Italian squad by Mussolini. Talk about conditional acceptance, right? Even after securing the championship, these South American-born stars were treated as complete outsiders by the very regime that recruited them. They were dispensable cogs in a fascist wheel, tools for the state, and nothing more. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Football as Foreign Policy. Over that decade, 3 highly politicized matches between Italy and England basically served as proxy battles. The Italian press framed their team as soldiers fighting a glorious battle against the liberal democratic giant. In 1933, Mussolini's sheer presence at the stadium in Rome was said to have completely disoriented the English team. In 1934, the clash in London was so incredibly violent it became known as the Battle of Highbury. And by 1939 in Milan, the entire event was heavily orchestrated to showcase perfect fascist organization and intimidate the British visitors right on the eve of a broader global conflict.
As you can see, these matches were far from just friendly games. They were carefully calculated diplomatic maneuvers. The British walked onto the pitch hoping to, maintain peace and act as sporting ambassadors. But the Italian state? They approached the pitch as a theater of war, using the game to project dominance and prove that their authoritarian structure was somehow superior to Western democracy. Knowing how deeply and successfully Mussolini altered the DNA of a beloved sport for political gain, essentially making 1930s football a direct mirror for fascism, we have to ask ourselves, has the politicization of international sports ever truly gone away? The blueprint laid down in the 1930s, using global sporting events to legitimize regimes, project power, and rally hypernationalism, well, that's a strategy that definitely didn't end with the Second World War. When we look at modern sports washing today, the echoes of this era are still very much with us. It's a fascinating, if somewhat chilling, lens through which to view the history of the game. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.